It is right after 1 o'clock, so we will go ahead and get start. Welcome, everyone. We have Allison Chamberlain today presenting on motivational interviewing. We're super excited to have her today. Hopefully, everyone's having a good Wednesday. We're middle of the week, right? Final stretch tomorrow. Just a couple of housekeeping things before I pass it on off to Allison. Obviously, you are muted, your cameras are disabled. Please use that chat box feature throughout to ask questions, provide insights, provide resources, anything like that. Just a reminder to keep any interaction professional and respectful throughout the presentation. Please please view our website, icpn.org. Please visit that. You can join our mailing list by clicking on the top right-hand corner of the web page. There's a link to join our mailing list. It says join mailing list. Please be sure to do that if you are not already on our mailing list and receiving our information about upcoming webinars. We do have several upcoming webinars. A couple of them are repeats. So December 4th, we have the Uniting Expertise, Building Powerful Interdisciplinary Teams for Person-Centered Support. That is the second session of that. December 18th, we have a new webinar coming up. That is Rainbow of Behavior, Harnessing ABA Principles with a Colorful Approach. January 18th, we will have a second session of the You Need to Calm Down Mindfulness, a Swift Solution for Tackling Anxiety. And then on January 22nd, we have a second session of Compassion, Fatigue, and Burnout. So please be sure to check out our website, icpn.org. You can view those upcoming webinars, as well as review some of our past recorded webinars, which are accessible on our YouTube site, which you can get through via our website. As a reminder to everyone, due to new regulations and just best practice, we do require you to fill out a post-exam following the webinar to receive your certificate. So it is not the survey that pops up automatically from Zoom. That's to provide feedback to us. That is still super important for us. It's important for presenters. It's important for us to know what topics you want covered in the future. So please be sure to still do that one. But after the webinar, within 24 hours, you will receive an email with a post-exam. It is labeled as a survey, but that is what needs to be completed in order to receive your certificate. So please be on the lookout for that. Like I said, within 24 hours, that will come to the email address that you registered with. Also, as a reminder, the link that you got to your email address was unique to you. So that is what makes you accountable for today. So if you're using somebody else's link, please be sure to go to the website right now, icpn.org, and register for this webinar, and it'll automatically put you into the webinar. But please be sure that you are using your own link so that you are accounted for. Because if you do not have your own link, you will not receive that certificate or the post-exam to get that certificate. So again, 24 hours, you will get that post-exam labeled as a survey. Please fill that out to get your certificate. An email was not sent out this morning with the presentation. However, you will receive that following the webinar. We will send out the presentation to all participants. I think that is all that I have, Allison.
Thank you.
You're up. Of course.
All right. Hello, everybody out there in Zoom land. So this is Illinois Crisis Prevention Network, and today we are looking at motivational interviewing. So this is going to be a general overview of the basic structure and approaches of motivational interviewing. In the PowerPoint or PDF that you guys will get of the presentation today, I did try to include some resources for you guys to look at out there, some cheat sheets, some websites that have a lot of really good information. So I just wanted you guys to have that as well. So just a little bit about me before we get started. My name is Allison Chamberlain, and I work for Illinois Crisis Prevention Network. I'm actually down in Carbondale, Illinois, serving on our support services team, and I am a behavior analyst. So I worked with a variety of different populations, ranging from IDDD, so intellectual disabilities, developmental disabilities, mental health field. I've also worked on a grant working with parents who were indicated for abuse and neglect of their children and looking at behavior modification and parenting skills, so trying to increase parenting skills and decrease abuse and neglect. And I would say in the different areas that I have worked, come in a variety of problem challenging behaviors. So motivational interviewing, we're going to be looking today at trying to work with people that are wanting to change behaviors or maybe wanting to change behaviors, because we know how difficult that can be. So I'm going to start off with just kind of a general background and history of motivational interviewing and how it was originally created and developed. Okay, so motivational interviewing is not that old as far as it goes back to the 1980s. It was originally created by the work of William R. Miller, who was a clinical psychologist. He was working and observed the impact of the therapist's behavior on client motivation. This realization came to him during his research and clinical practice when he was working with people struggling with alcohol use. His observations led him to kind of question the confrontational methods commonly used in addiction treatment, which often involve direct persuasion or confrontation aimed at overcoming client resistance. So basically kind of notice that the approaches and style used in the therapy and working with people that had a direct impact on their resistance. And so kind of confronting that person and convincing them you have a problem, this behavior is an issue, and you need to change, that in return created more resistance from the client. He noticed that a more empathetic and client-centered approach could effectively enhance motivation for change. I know in today's age, client-centered approaches and person-centered approaches are considered, best strategy and best approach. And they come about for a reason. And I would say that this has been a very big contributor to that field. So the development, so it was actually kind of two people. We're looking at William R. Miller and then also someone else that he partnered with in the 80s. So he was working with, let's see here, Stephen Rolnick, and he was a psychologist with experience in health psychology. So the formal development of motivational interviewing took shape in the collaboration of those two people working together. And they kind of created the basic structure of motivational interviewing. Now, obviously, along the road in the past 40 years, it has, evolved somewhat in, I guess, kind of like the core structure and implementing different things and recommendations, but it still has a pretty strong resemblance to what it was originally created in the late 80s. I apologize. I'm going to be coughing and drinking a lot of water. It's Southern Illinois, and allergies down here are atrocious. So this also brought in elements from client-centered therapy founded by Carl Rogers. So his emphasis was on empathy, non-judgmental listening, and unconditional positive regard. These became the core components for motivational interviewing. And the first detailed description of motivational interviewing appeared in a 1983 article and in Miller and Rolnick's book, Motivational Interviewing, Preparing People to Change Addictive Behavior, and that was published in 1991, formalizing motivational interviewing as distinct therapeutic approach. I always kind of like to say whenever these styles or approaches or evidence-based practices first kind of introduced into publications. So the Miller and Rolnick book, there's been a lot of different versions of that. I think there's even a most recent one of 2023 that was published just last year on the motivational interviewing. So they're still publishing books together and continuing the development of motivational interviewing. And I know kind of like whenever I was like researching this myself and looking at some of this, empathy and non-judgmental approach, like that should seem kind of obvious when you're going into therapy or working with people or trying to affect behavior change. But even though those are kind of simplistic in nature as far as what they are very hard to hone and develop those skills and utilize them. So here on support services team, we work with people who have intellectual disabilities, developmental disabilities, and usually comorbid mental health diagnoses. And for one reason or another, you know, they've been referred for target behaviors, which usually are things like property destruction and physical aggression. But a lot of the times, whenever I'm meeting with the people that I work with, they do have behaviors or things that, you know, they are recognizing that they are detrimental to themselves and to other people. And noticing that those things are really challenging to change and really hard to work on. And so motivational interviewing is something that I've actually been trying to incorporate into my approach a lot more, because I have had a handful of people that I've worked with recently that I've been trying to work with them on things like eating better, because those were contributing to a lot of concerns and issues, or blood sugar management, things like that. And noticing that my approach probably wasn't the best, and that I was creating more of a problem and resistance, and that I needed to change and evolve what I was doing. And that kind of led me looking into motivational interviewing and trying to use that as a strategy. And recognizing that my skills needed to be worked on a bit. So the applications of motivational interviewing are pretty broad. Originally, like I said, it was created for use of working with people who were struggling with alcohol use, but over the years, it has branched out to many areas. So managing chronic illnesses, criminal justice, rehabilitation efforts, education, sports coaching, substance abuse is still a really big one. There's tons and tons of articles and meta-analysis out there looking at it. Blood glucose management, weight management, dental hygiene. So its popularity expanded pretty rapidly. And so looking at like addiction treatment, originally, like I said, alcohol use disorders, but now it's used with substance abuse disorders, including tobacco, opioids, stimulants. And again, this helps individuals explore their ambivalence towards quitting and enhances their commitment to sobriety. In healthcare settings, it is applied to encourage lifestyle changes, such as increasing physical activity, improving diet, and adhering to medication regimes for managing chronic conditions like diabetes, hypertension, and heart disease. It's used by nurses, physicians, dietitians, and other health professionals to support behavior change without dictating solutions to the client. And so when we get into the approach and looking at the structure, it's kind of this dance between, you know, supportive, guided, and listening. And the whole point is to try to find the motivation and the desire and the skills within the person for them to want to create about that change. I'm sure any of you have had somebody come and tell you you need to do something. You just kind of want to do the opposite, and that creates that ambivalence. And we'll talk more about that in a little bit. With mental health, so applications in the mental health supports treatment of mental health conditions such as anxiety, depression, enhancing motivation for activities that improve well-being, like engaging in social activities, following a treatment plan. Also can play a role in addressing behaviors like self-harm, suicidal ideation. In the criminal justice and corrections realm, it's employed in rehabilitation programs to motivate offenders to engage in pro-social behaviors and reduce recidivism. It helps individuals in probation or parole settings consider the consequences of their actions and make positive life changes. Education and youth services used to address student behavior, support goal setting, improve academic engagement. It can also be effective in working with at-risk youth to prevent substance abuse or other risky behaviors. And sports and coaching is used by coaches to enhance athletes' motivation, goal setting, and mental resilience. So the reason why I kind of wanted to go over these and give some examples is obviously there's 446 of you out there today. And so everybody's going to kind of be thinking about, how am I going to use this? What behaviors am I wanting to look at? What people am I wanting to work with this on? Am I wanting to develop these skills to use that? And so everyone's going to have kind of different areas, target areas that they're wanting to look at. So just kind of give you guys some ideas of the different areas that it can be used in when looking at it for developing for yourself. So what is it? It is a client-centered counseling approach designed to help people find the motivation to make a positive behavior change. It's designed to help address the ambivalence associated with change. And we're going to talk about this in just a minute, but we all know that change is tough. I mean, I'm sure the majority of you out there have tried to change one of your own behaviors, whether it's exercising, eating habits, smoking, drinking, shopping. I mean, there's so many things, and we know that it is tough. And then we also know that when people come at us and say, you need to change, or, that's not good for you, it kind of makes us pretty defensive and argumentative, and sometimes even more resistant and say, well, I'm just going to do what I want. So that's really not a helpful approach. And a lot of times the obvious is there. Like, we know smoking's bad for us, yet people do it every single day. So telling people over and over that smoking's bad for you probably isn't the best approach style to getting somebody to change and quit. It combines evidence-based approaches from cognitive psychology and social psychology. So again, that's kind of that merging of William Miller and Rollnick. It assumes varying levels of readiness for change. So sometimes I think that when people seek out therapy or counseling or services in general, I think that sometimes there's this assumption that everybody is at the same level of willingness to change. And that's just not something that we can expect. And I actually had kind of a recent experience where I was recommending counseling for somebody, and they had met with a counselor. And after, I believe, like a handful of sessions, they had said, well, they're not willing to change. They're not, being truthful during sessions. And I just don't think it's really beneficial. And so I was a little disappointed in that, because I was just kind of hoping that, like, it was just exposure. Like, let's just get this process started. And I feel like this motivational interviewing could have been a really helpful component for that situation, instead of just saying, yeah, this isn't going to work. We're not going to get anywhere after, a handful of sessions. Therapy in general, behavior change, working on problems, I mean, that takes time. And it also takes time for people to be willing to open up to you and to work with you and to trust you as a clinician. So I think that this approach especially encompasses that, so that we can really get to know somebody and have the person-centered, client-centered approach to it, instead of the clinician driving it. People are not fundamentally unmotivated to make changes. They're ambivalent. So it assumes that this is kind of a basic assumption, that people are not fundamentally unmotivated to make changes. They are ambivalent, and problem behavior conflicts with at least some aspect of their self-concepts, values, and goals. So I want you guys to kind of think of maybe one thing that you do that is not good for you. And then think about what your, like, concept of yourself, your values, and your goals are. And I'm willing to bet that some of those things clash. That a goal would be, I want to be a healthy person and I want to live for a long time so I can, spend time with my family. But yet, I'm eating junk food or not exercising or doing things that kind of clash with that. And so it's kind of accepting, the unperfectness of people, and that we can have things that don't exactly line up with each other. And that doesn't mean that we're not willing to change. That just means that people are complicated and change is difficult. So it kind of takes in that perspective and builds it into the approach. And a prerequisite that people become aware of their behavioral discrepancies and actively confront. So that's a prerequisite for the people. That is why it's called a person-centered or goal-oriented style of communication, with particular focus on expressions of change. The goal is to increase personal motivation for and commitment to behavior change by eliciting and intensifying a person's own reasons for change in an atmosphere of acceptance and empathy. So I've kind of brought this up already, but change is tough. I'm sure everybody knows that. There's a lot of things that I have changed in my life. There's things that I have, quit or changed that were extremely difficult, and I have maintained that. There are things that I have not. So there's things that still, as a person, I feel like I need to do and better myself. And it's really hard to do that. And there's a lot of reasons for that. I mean, it's a really kind of complicated thing. I mean, habits are created over time, they're shaped over time. And a lot of times, the things that aren't ideal for us can be pretty reinforcing. So if you think of like shopping, drinking, drugs, overindulging in food, those all have very reinforcing effects from like a chemical component. And then if you also think of things like OCD behavior, like excessive OCD behavior, those exist and like work for a person because essentially they typically reduce anxiety. And so that feels better whenever you touch your doorknob 23 times and walk around your house in 10 circles before you leave so it doesn't burn down. When your house doesn't burn down, all that anxiety goes away because what you did worked. But the problem is when those things start interfering in our daily life and our ability to do the things that we want to do or achieve the goals that we want to achieve, it's a problem. And so looking at the reasons why behavior is so difficult to change, I think is really important. We have the separation sometimes as a clinician, and then as a person that we're working with. And I think sometimes when we get in that mode of professional work, we can forget what it's like to be a person and what it's like to be imperfect and what it's like to do things that maybe aren't ideal for us. I think another problem that I've seen working in this population, specifically in the IDDD world, is expectations for people. Expectations that people with disabilities should have better behaviors than people, in the typical population. And so I think that's really inappropriate to expect, when people get really upset because somebody was, sending inappropriate pictures from their phone, or because somebody's, smoking a pack and a half of cigarettes a day, or somebody wants to eat out, every day of the week. But recognizing that lots of people do that, and that's a choice that lots of people make. And so I will say the caveat statement of, I know that as professionals, we're supposed to help guide people and help them make choices, especially if they're not able to make the best choices for themselves. But look at how many people in the typically developing population make the same choices to do things that are not good for them. And, I think that's a little bit hypocritical. So expecting that imperfectness of people, and that people do have the autonomy of choice, and waiting until they are motivated to make those changes and recognize the damage that it's having in their life. And so I understand that some people don't recognize that, but I can tell you that the majority of people that I have worked with that were doing things that were detrimental to themselves were very aware of the consequences. Talking with somebody who has unmanaged diabetes and they, drink a lot of sugar pop or eat out, they know, yeah, having really high blood sugar can hurt me over time. And they can list, it's damaged my heart, it's damaged my kidneys, damaged my organs, can mess up my vision, it can ruin my feet. So they could even list all of the medical reasons for it. So they're very aware of the consequences. It's just that challenge associated with change. And so I really want people to just have that. And I feel like that perspective is also going to go hand in hand with the empathy and necessary to have a motivational interviewing approach style, and to kind of remember what it's like to be a person and to want to change a behavior that's really, really hard to change. Okay, so ambivalence, and this is kind of what the approaches of motivational interviewing is, to help approach the ambivalence that people have in wanting to change. So this is a very normal part of preparing for change, and a place where people can remain stuck for quite some time. I'm sure the majority of you have had a behavior that you've been wanting to change for a long time. I know I have several. And I have, said, yeah, I want to change. And, but then when it comes down to it, I'm not there yet. And so just recognizing that and remembering that. And a directing style approach is used and argues for change with a person who is ambivalent. It naturally brings out an opposition in people. And I'm sure many of you have experienced this when you have approached somebody and said, hey, this is not good for you. You need to change this. They're going to put on the brakes. They're going to get defensive, and they're going to, maybe even dig their heels in even more and just, say, well, I'm just going to do what I want. And it might even get worse. And that people are more likely to be persuaded by what they hear themselves say. This is kind of like a natural phenomenon. And a lot of time when I'm working with people, I might help guide them to, that epiphany or result or whatever it is. And then when they say that, I'll say, oh my gosh, that's such a good idea that you had, because they are more likely to be persuaded by what they hear themselves. And this is incorporated in a lot of different things. Just like as a behavior analyst, your behavior plans are more likely to be followed and implemented if you include the people in planning them and creating them. So things of that nature, just because when people feel like that they're included and they have a say, they're more likely to follow it. So confrontation. This has been this actually, so this is kind of whenever they were looking at creating motivational interviewing. Unfortunately, confrontation was a pretty big component of the therapy style. And so looking at the confrontation approach that was used in the types of therapy, so Miller and Rolnick kind of looked at what are the outcomes of using this approach and style, is linked to really poor outcomes. Success, however, is linked to high levels of accurate empathy. So when a clinician is able to demonstrate true and accurate empathy, there's much higher success in the person that they're working with. Confrontation increases defensiveness, and it decreases the likelihood for change. An opposite approach of other therapy styles where the clinician is the one to voice the concerns. And so a lot of times, the clinician was the one to say, hey, here's the problem. This is the issue. What, you need to change. What are we going to do? And so motivational interviewing flips that and wants the person to come to those realizations of what the problem is. Now, there can be kind of like a clashing of agenda, so to speak, on the clinician and the person in motivational interviewing. And that's where the clinician really needs to be aware of what their goal is, what their agenda, and if it's clashing with the person, how do they address that? Because it is supposed to be goal-oriented, person-centered, client-centered approach. Okay. So that's just a little bit of background on kind of the creation of it and the realization that our current therapy model at the time was not working very well, and it needed to be changed to help people actually make the changes that they had within themselves to do. So the general spirit of motivational interviewing goes with the acronym PACE. It is partnership, acceptance, compassion, and evocation. So we will look at that. And so there's kind of like, there's a spirit, and it has like these core components. There's core skills, and then kind of like a structure and approach. And we'll go over all of these, but I wanted to do the spirit because I feel like that's kind of like the overarching general vibe of everything. So partnership, we're looking at something that is you're doing with the person and for the person. You're not doing to them. And so it's meant to be a collaborative approach between the clinician, between the person that they're working with. The interviewee tries to create a positive interpersonal atmosphere that is not coercive. And it is a meeting of aspirations, and honesty about them is essential. And so I think that this also kind of goes into the realm of like rapport building with the people that you're working with, really being able to understand, who they are as a person, being genuine as yourself and kind of promoting that partnership between, like, I'm not here as an authority figure. I'm not here to tell you what to do or to dictate change or anything of that nature. We are here to work together. And, you're guiding this on what you want to do, but we're going to work together. It's supposed to be an unpatronizing collaboration with the client or the person that you're working with, and communication is on equal terms. And the clinician does not assume the role of the expert or the superior to the patient. And I can't tell you how many times that I have kind of observed other professionals, interacting with people, and you can just feel it. I mean, it doesn't even need to be said. You can just feel it in the energy and the way that people are interacting and how the people are acting towards each other, that the professional or clinician, whoever it is, thinks that there are in this kind of like authority type figure. And then the other person that they're working with is usually either somewhat submissive or kind of like argumentative, and kind of combative, because of those dynamics and kind of like the power struggle that can create. And so this approach, the partnership approach, is designed to help eliminate that. Okay. The next component of the spirit of motivational interviewing is acceptance. This is difficult. So actually I do a lot of other trainings in different areas. And so some of them are like, validation, verbal de-escalation, and a lot of them look at some of these core skills like acceptance and empathy. And this is a hard one, and this can be a hard one for me. And I have certain people that, I work with, or certain types of people that I work with, where some of these things become more challenging. So acceptance, we're looking at an attitude of profound acceptance about what the client brings. And this doesn't mean that we're approving of, what they're bringing to the table or how they're wanting to go or the direction. We don't necessarily have to approve of it, but we have to be accepting that this is what this person's wanting to do. And there's 4 parts of that. So there's absolute worth, acceptance of the person as an individual and that they have worth themselves. Accurate empathy is an active effort and interest in understanding their perspective. And autonomy support is the right to self-direction and affirmation. Find and acknowledge the person's strengths and efforts. So this again is kind of like a fundamental attitude and spirit of motivational interviewing, and that we want to have acceptance and empathy towards the patient's needs, experiences, and points of view. In addition to unconditional regard for the patient, this includes ensuring their autonomy of choice and decision-making in relation to behavior change, as well as the desired goals and methods of change. So again, autonomy. I think some of the times where this can be difficult for the person, like the clinician working with the people, is when values get in the way. So you may have somebody who is really against, certain things that person's engaging in, and then that kind of creates it to be like, well, this is obvious. Why would you want to do it? Because that's a value for them. But for the person that they're working with, it's very different. And so that can really impede on that acceptance and empathy component. And so that's where we need to be really understanding of this is, they are their own person. They have their own values, their own goals, their own decisions. And we need to be, respectful of that. And if we're here as a partner, we need to accept them and to work towards what the goals that they're doing, because that's kind of what we're supposed to be doing, is helping them and not being judgmental or criticizing or imposing our values or what we would do in our life on somebody else. Okay. Compassion. So here we want to actively promote the other's welfare and give priority to the other's needs. This is actually new and was added in because it was felt that many clinicians could practice the principles in pursuit of self-interest. And So I guess that they were really looking at that, like clinicians were just kind of like learning how to implement motivational interviewing, and we're doing it without compassion. And that I think is still going to affect the outcome pretty greatly. And we have to have compassion for people. So this is to have your heart in the right place, so that the trust that you're wanting somebody to give you is deserved. And again, I feel like this just kind of goes into those core spirits of motivational interviewing. Okay, so here we're looking at the idea is that people already have much of what they need inside of them to change. And again, like I said, a lot of people that I've talked with, I'll say, what do you think I'm doing here, and that kind of thing. We're talking with them, and they're going to bring it up. They're like, well, this is going on, and I know that this isn't good, and I know I shouldn't be doing this. And so, I mean, they're already very well aware of what's going on. And then, I mean, the other thing is that whenever I've worked with people and trying to make those changes, those behavior changes, and I'm specifically kind of thinking of somebody who had extremely uncontrolled diabetes, majority of the things and the plants and the stuff that we worked on, and that ended up working, they came up with because it worked for them. And I can actually remember specifically some of the things that I had tried to implement and I had tried to do did not work because they were resistant to them. It didn't really like fit in their life and kind of like their lifestyle. And so I really had to just kind of let go of that and say, well, let's find what works for you. And it may not look the way that I would do it, or, other people would do it. But if we are actually going to try to make some change, we've got to make it that it's going to work for you. And so I'm actually usually pretty quite impressed with the insight that people already have inside of them and the ability to understand and recognize those things. And that we want to assume that people have a deep well of wisdom and experience within the person, and the counselor can draw on that. So we're just really there to help kind of like guide and listen and really bring that out in them. Evoking what is already present, not instilling what is missing. And I think a lot of times, people are looking at that like, well, what don't you have, or what's missing here, and what can I put in here to fix this, instead of looking at what do you have already, what skills do you have, what strengths do you have, and how do we bring those out, and how do we make you see them and build upon them as a person and utilize them, and already have the pro change and pro status quo argument within. So by that I mean, and I'm sure you guys have had this experience where you've talked to somebody else, or even kind of had a conversation with yourself about change. And so somebody will have the argument for, someone says, well, you could probably never quit smoking. That's too hard. Oh, well, I know I can do it, and I know it's really healthy, and this is, I've done it before, and this is how I would do it. So that's kind of like that pro change argument. But if you flipped it and you said, oh, you really need to quit smoking, it's really, really bad for you. Well, I like doing it, and I don't think it's really that big of a deal, and I want to be happy in my life and do the things. So that's pro change and pro status argument. And usually, and I would say every time I've ever worked with somebody in this nature, those are both already in the person, kind of loaded and ready to go, depending on how somebody approaches them. And again, going back to that confrontational approach, if you come at somebody confrontationally, that's what you're going to get, is that pro status quo. I don't want to change. I'm not ready to, I don't want to, it doesn't matter. So we want to evoke and strengthen the change and motivations that are already there and already inside of somebody. So evoking motivation to change by exploring and reinforcing the patient's reasons for change. So that's part of that motivational interviewing process, asking them questions, interviewing them to find what's inside of them and what are the reasons that they want to change, and then building on those. This also includes developing discrepancy between current problem behavior and the patient's goals and values. So like, for example, you said that it's important to you to do more exercise again. How does that tie in with your smoking? So just kind of like asking that to see where's the discrepancy in what am I doing? What are my actual behaviors? And then what are the things that I want for myself, and what are my goals, and what are my values, and how do those things just not really fit in together? Instead of me pointing it out and putting it in their face, they need to come to the realization. And it draws out the person's priorities, values, and wisdom to explore reasons for change and support success. So the other thing is, and I'm not really sure, like, the types of people that are out there today as far as professions and the type of people that you're working with and the behaviors that you would be looking at for change. But I really want you to kind of think of this as in a broad overview, because really a lot of those behaviors, when you start boiling them down, you can look at how do they not line up with the person, like what do they not like about it, even though the problems might be different for other people, what do they not like about that behavior, and what are their goals for themselves, and the conflicting nature there. So I don't want anybody to kind of think like, well, this problem behavior, this kind of thing wouldn't work, because I think if you can have that conversation with somebody about it and just say, what are you wanting for yourself, you'll be able to utilize it. I know that this obviously isn't going to work with every single person, because somebody has to have the ability to have, conversations with you and thoughts and things like that. But I really feel like the approach is very wide for different behaviors. So looking at the writing reflex, so this is the belief that you must convince or persuade the person to do the right thing. And I think sometimes clinicians have this and don't even realize it. Counselors often miss that they're in the midst of this, and they often think and feel that they need to ask the right questions, need to find the proper arguments, provide the client with critical information, to provoke the decisive emotions to make change occur, to pursue the correct logic to make the person see change. I have fallen into this trap. I know I have. I can tell you times of when I've done it. And then typically I would walk away, and then I would assess, what just happened. And I was like, what was I doing? Why was I doing that? And I think sometimes it comes from a place of like, we want to help people so much, and we want to affect change, because that shows that we're good at what we do, right? But making sure that we're not falling into those traps that like, I have to make this happen, because we're not going to like force people to change. That is just not going to happen, and taking that step back and not falling into that trap. Yeah, so I think just making sure that you guys are really being careful and not falling into this and just trying to like convince somebody that they need to change and what the right thing is. And I know that that sounds really horrible, but I think that it's really easy to fall into that and then not realize it, because I've done it without even recognizing that it was happening. So here's some writing reflex example questions. So looking at the writing reflex questions are the opposite of the writing reflex. So this is why I wanted to give you guys some example questions so that you could utilize these instead of that falling into that writing reflex trap. Why would you want to make this change? How might you go about it in order to succeed? What are the 3 best reasons for you to do it? How important is it for you to make this change, and why? How confident do you feel about being able to make this change, and why? Oh, typo. So what do you think you will do? So I just wanted to give you guys some examples there, to kind of keep in the back of your mind. So if you start to fall on that writing reflex, with somebody, take a step back and just start asking some questions, those open-ended questions, and we'll go over that because that's a big part of the skills in motivational interviewing. Okay, so here is the theoretical model and stages of change. Change is, again, we talked about this, really, really hard. And so you have these stages of change, and I would say that they're not static, that people are going to be moving through up and down and throughout the stages of change, right? So you might have somebody that had already kind of made it to the maintenance, they had made the changes, they were maintaining it, and then, fell back into old ways, into old habits. And we might have to go back to, preparation stage again, or even contemplation. It kind of just depends on the person and where they are in that. So the pre-contemplation is not thinking of making a change now in the future. They're like, this is not happening. I'm not doing that. Contemplation is where they're aware that they need to make a change. Preparation is weighing, kind of like weighing pros and cons and planning on how to make that change happen. Action is where they decide to change and attempt to do so. And then maintenance is kind of maintaining that change throughout. Again, like I said, they are not static and people can move throughout them. And it's the goal of the clinician, the interviewee, to move with that person and to not get caught up in where they are. So here are the processes of motivational interviewing. So motivational interviewing has evolved considerably since its initial development. While prior, the application focuses on 4 principles. So I will go over these, but it's express empathy, develop discrepancy, roll with resistance, or the sustained talk, as they call it, and support self-efficacy. But now it is based on 4 processes. So that's what these are. But again, I'm going to go over those other ones later. And the original 4 principles have kind of been folded into the 4 processes as reflective listening or strategic responses intended to move conversations along. These processes help practitioners frame a clinical session with their clients and provide specifics as outlined below. And so when we get into the skills are, like I said, they're folded into these processes. So like evoking, there's a whole set of skills that's used in there called ORs, and we'll go over that, but this is the general kind of like framework. And we will get jumping into that. So engaging. This is where both parties establish a helpful connection and working relationship process by which both parties establish a helpful connection and working together. And so this is a lot of that rapport building, relationship building, kind of discussing what are things going to look like, how are we going to work together, establishing kind of like that trust and open honesty. So that is kind of like the engaging process. Let's see, I was trying to find something else that I had on the engaging process I thought that I wanted to go over. So yeah, we want to really allow time to develop a trusting relationship. And that's exactly what I was thinking. So when working with people, this is going to be extremely different for people because you're looking at trust. And that is a very tricky thing. And I'm sure that you guys know some people who are extremely trusting right off the bat, and they will start telling you everything about them and their life from the get-go. And then you have other people who are very guarded, and it can take a really long time to get to that. And so making sure that you're just taking that time to really develop that relationship, listen, understand, avoid falling into those traps with people. And some questions to kind of ask yourself is like, how comfortable is this person talking to me? If they're still really uncomfortable, you still have some work to do in building that relationship. How supportive and helpful am I being? Do I understand this person's perspectives and concerns? Because if you don't understand the person, then how are you going to help guide them through motivational interviewing to help work with them? You're not. So that's why it's important. How comfortable do I feel in this conversation? And does this feel like a collaborative partnership? Again, going back to the spirit. Focusing. So focusing, whenever we're looking here, is kind of like creating an agenda map, right? So this is the process of engaging leads to a focus on a particular agenda, what the person wants to address, and the clinician or provider may also have an agenda. Parts of that agenda may overlap and be the same, and then there might be differing parts. So one or more change goals might emerge, and focusing helps identify the direction. Where are we going? What is our purpose here? So again, you can create an agenda map for what you guys are going to be working on. What goals for change does this person really have? So these are kind of the things that you can ask yourself. Do I have different goals for this person? Because that's going to be a problem. If you have different goals, That's where things are going to clash, where you're going to want different outcomes. And so you're really going to have to kind of step back as a clinician and work on that. Are we working together with a common purpose? And does it feel like we're moving together, not in different directions? And do I have a clear sense of where we are going? And does this feel more like a dance or wrestling? So just letting you guys know some of those resources that I will have in the PDF of the presentation today is also going to help looking at like creating an agenda map and creating a plan for sessions and things like that. I'm not going to go in depth into that today as much just because we're trying to do like a more of a general overview. But if people are really interested in this topic and make requests for more detailed aspects of it, we could look at maybe doing something that in the future. So the next part is evoking, and this is eliciting the client's own motivation for change, having the person voice their arguments for change. We're going to be exploring readiness, willingness, and ability to change. Am I steering too far or too fast in a particular direction? So again, these are questions to ask yourself for this kind of process. What are the person's own reasons for change? Is the reluctance more about confidence or reluctance to change? What change talk am I hearing? We're going to talk about change talk and sustained talk in just a little bit. And am I the one arguing for the change? I'm actually going to partake in one of my things that I need to work on changing, which is soda. So, I'm not ready to change. Anyways, so that's the evoking process right there. And elicit and respond to change talk. And like I said, we're going to look at change talk and sustained talk and how to tell those two apart. But that's when you know when somebody's making that shift towards wanting to change and moving towards that kind of like planning phase that we talked about and action phase. Okay. Planning is looking at if basically whenever the person comes to the point where they are ready to start making that change, we want to help the person establish a change plan, right? So what are we going to do? How are we going to do this? What's our plan? What would be a reasonable next step towards change? What would help this person to move forward? Am I remembering to evoke rather than to prescribe a plan? So again, I think for some of us clinicians, that can be really hard because we're the ones usually kind of like dictating everything and saying, this is what you do and how you do it. But motivational interviewing is different. They're guiding the process and we're working with them. Am I offering needed advice or information with permission? So that's a big one too. Before we just start throwing out advice and information, are we asking like, do you want this? Would you like to hear, some information about this? Are you willing to listen to that? Are you willing to listen to advice and asking permission first instead of just kind of spewing that on people? Am I retaining a sense of quiet curiosity about what will work best for this person? And one of the things that I added on the resources section in this is a pocket guide to motivational interviewing. I feel like this is a really helpful tool as well, because it has a nice outline on it. And so I added the link in there for you guys to be able to access that. Okay. So here are the skills that we're going to be using in motivational interviewing. And that is ORS. So there's lots of acronyms. I love acronyms. And this is what we're going to be remembering when these are the skills that we're going to use. ORS, open-ended questions, affirming, reflecting, and summarizing. And I'm sure some of you guys recognize some of these skills from active listening and things of that. So that's really a big part of active listening are a lot of these things too. And that makes sense when you think about what motivational interviewing is and how it's done, that you would have a lot of active listening involved. And it's really a big component. Like if you go and watch, I've got a couple of videos at the end of examples and non-examples. But it's a lot of like asking questions, and there are actually like some suggested ratios of like kind of questions to statements, because it's supposed to be asking those questions to help that person kind of like think about it and give the information that's inside of them and help them guide them through the process. And so it's not just somebody lecturing at you. It's somebody kind of like trying to evoke that within you. Okay, so these are considered the core counseling skills. Providers should use open-ended questions to invite clients to tell their story and obtain a meaningful understanding of the client's goals, values, and beliefs. And so, one of the things that I try to do and try to make time for whenever I start working with somebody new is I will just ask them, tell me about yourself, tell me about your life. Who are you? Where did you grow up? What was it like for you? And really try to get a good perspective of that person and who they are. I know some people are more guarded and resistant, and that can take more time. And if that's the case, I really try to make sure that I'm doing that along the way. I have somebody that I'm working with right now, and I'm a year deep, and I'm just starting to really get some trust going with that person because of their personal history and things that have happened. So it's really different for different people. Back to open-ended questions. So we want to be able to ask questions that help us understand the client's goals, values, and beliefs. So here's some examples. You can say things like, what was it like for you when? Can you tell me a little bit more about what do you want to do next? Help me understand, whatever it is. You can also use things like extreme. So like, what is the best part about, eating, the food that you like, junk food or sugar food or whatever it is? What's the best part of that? It tastes good, I really like it. It makes me feel good. And I feel full and satiated, and I feel like I filled up that void or whatever it is. And then ask the opposite, what's the worst part about it? Well, at midnight when I start to feel sick to my stomach, that's not super fun at all. So looking at using those open-ended questions, and I think this is a skill that you have to develop as a clinician is learning what questions to ask and how to ask them. But I think looking up some examples and things of that nature can really help there. Okay, affirmations. So we have ORs, O-A, this is our A, affirming or affirmations is using affirmation expresses genuine appreciation and confirms a positive regard for clients' hidden and expressed strengths. So for example, you could say things like, you got discouraged last week, but you kept going to your meeting, or you are persistent. Or that's a good idea for how you can avoid situations where you might be tempted to, eat this or drink this or, engage in those types of behaviors. I think that making affirmation statements can be a little bit challenging too. So I think that as a clinician, that's something that you're going to have to develop that skill and learning how to say those. And it is a key element of motivational interviewing and building and maintaining a therapeutic relationship with the client. This identifies their strengths. So we're showing them, yes, this is the strength. This is what we're wanting. So we're kind of like discriminating, doing kind of like some discrimination training with the person and showing this is, what we're looking for. The use of affirmations identifies their strengths and acknowledges the client's efforts and their struggles. Affirmations are important supportive statements to help clients increase their confidence and their ability to change. Affirmations are statements of appreciation and understanding. They are statements intended to make the client feel supported by the practitioner, regardless of the status of the behavioral change or attempts to change, and play an important role in building the therapeutic alliance. However, affirmations must be genuine for them to truly resonate with a client. And so this is where I will warn you not to kind of say things that are disingenuous or feel weird or don't line up with the person. So really you need to know the person, you really need to know your affirmation statements, because if you say something like, oh, that was super wonderful. And the person's like, what are you talking about? It's not going to help and it's not going to serve the purpose. So make sure that you're really building the skill of affirmation statements. Here's some other examples. I appreciate that you're willing to meet with me today. I actually say that quite often. I have a lot of people that are pretty resistant to even come out of their bedroom and meet with me. And when they do, I say that I appreciate you coming out and talking to me today, because that's a step in the right direction. You were clearly a very resourceful person. You handled yourself really well in that situation. That's a good suggestion. If I were in your shoes, I don't know if I could have managed nearly so well. I've enjoyed talking with you today. Again, it needs to be genuine. The other thing then is not just like saying nice things about the person. We really want it to be a genuine statement about their strengths and acknowledging their efforts. Okay, reflective listening, and this is part of active listening. So here, what we're looking at is repeating or rephrasing. So the listener repeats or substitutes synonyms or phrases and stays close to what the speaker has said. I try not to deviate very far from what the person has said, because I have literally changed one word and that's not what I said. Okay, so I try really hard not to change some of those keywords. And paraphrasing, the listener makes a restatement in which the speaker's meaning is inferred. And I might even say, is that accurate? Or is that correct? Is that what you meant? Reflecting of feeling. Listener emphasize emotional aspects of communication through feeling statements. This is the deepest form of listening. Okay, I'm trying to watch my time. This is a primary skill used in motivational interviewing to demonstrate empathy, interest, and understanding. Again, you have to be genuine about this. And all of these skills. And so that's the other thing. And when I finish this, I'm going to go over a few things about making sure that you're not doing this incorrectly, because I feel like that could do more harm than good if you're not following these steps correctly or doing them in a genuine fashion with compassion. Reflective listening involves the therapist hearing and understanding, and then letting the client know that they are being heard and understand you. So I hear what you're saying. I understand that, like, this is, what you're feeling and what you're going through. In relation to encouraging behavior change, reflective listening helps to clarify and explore reasons for change. In reflective listening, you do not offer your perspective, but instead you keep the focus directly on what your client is saying. So reflective listening is simply letting the person know that I hear you and I understand you. That's what its purpose is. Reflective listening can be viewed as a checking process to ensure that both client and therapist understand what is being communicated. Sometimes I use this in a little bit of a different fashion, just to make sure that, like, what the person's saying, and then when I repeat that it's the same thing. And if there's discord, or they're saying that, no, that's not what I said, but I repeated it exactly, like, I know we got some problems going on. So I use reflective listening as just a skill for myself in a variety of different ways. It's primarily a skill in outreach, and it's the pathway for engaging others in relationships, building trust, and fostering motivation to change. Reflective listening appears easy, but it takes hard work and skill to do. Sometimes the skills we use when working with clients do not exemplify reflective listening, but instead serve as roadblocks to effective communication. Examples are misinterpreting what is said or assuming what a person needs. So those are roadblocks to effective communication. It is vital to learn to think reflectively. This is a way of thinking that accompanies good reflective listening and includes interest in what the person has to say and has respect for the person's inner wisdom. So really, the other thing that I want to caution you on is to be careful about this and not to do it incorrectly or do it disingenuously, because I think that is going to take steps back in that rapport and partnership and all those things that you built with the person, because they think that if you're tuning out or you're being sarcastic or whatever's coming off, that's not going to bode well for you. And here is the S in our acronym, ORS, summarizing. Again, this is an active listening skill. Summarizing is an application of reflective listening and should be used throughout the session. As with reflective listening, summaries can be a good way to check that you have thoroughly understood your client. Summarizing can be a particularly useful technique to assist a client in organizing their experience. So really, we're just kind of like summarizing, and here's kind of like a brief, like step-by-step on how to do it. Begin with a statement indicating you're making a summary. Give special attention to their change talk. If they express ambivalence, it's helpful to include both sides. Useful to include information and summary statements from other sources. Be concise and with an invitation, and depending on response, it may lead naturally to planning or taking concrete steps towards the change. So you can say things like, I hear that you're saying this, you know, this person felt this way, so the other information, that's both sides. Be concise, you know, is what I'm saying correct? Is that how you feel? Is that, you know, what you're wanting to do? So really just kind of summarizing. And I might do this as several steps throughout a session with somebody. So that I might do it, you know, within an hour, 3, 4, you know, even 5 times, depending on what's coming up. I do want to really just kind of make sure that you guys are doing these things and you're not falling into traps. Blaming, acting like you're the expert and you have all of the answers, bombarding the person with questions. So this is a lot of questions, but we have to be really careful about that and use them wisely. And it is okay to pause and to have a little bit of silence and let that person think and process. Some people think silence is uncomfortable, but sometimes it can be helpful too, because when people have a lot going on in their head, lots and lots and lots of questions and talk is too much. And I encourage you to be very aware of yourself and what's going on with you, because things like conflicting values can cause problems, and where these things can come off as disingenuous or sarcastic or rude, and also burnout. I would really encourage you to maybe screen and watch yourself for burnout, because if you're having burnout and you're trying to go in and using some of these techniques, I think that it can go very wrong for you and can do more damage than good with your client. So just a little bit of a check yourself as a clinician. Sustain talk and change talk, right? So this is what we use. We use ORS and we use some other things. So I'm going to do another acronym in a minute, and we to listen for sustain talk and change talk. So change talk is statements that favor making a change. There's a couple of examples. And sustain talk is statements that support not changing. I'm going to stay the way that I am. I'm going to sustain. So change talk. I'm so tired of feeling this way. I'm willing to try. I really want to be healthier with those. So those are a few examples. Sustain talk. I don't see the point. Things will never change. It isn't that bad. Changing my eating habits just seems too hard. And so listening and eliciting for change talk, we can use the acronym that darn cat. So not that, but darn cat. That's what we want to remember. Desire, ability, reason, need, commitment, activation, and taking steps. So people, they said that darn cat and they remember it. So this is something I threw in there that is this is from the SAMHSA website, and I'm pretty sure I included that in the resources, and I know it's kind of small, so that's why I included it for you guys in the link to go to it. But these are examples of darn cat statements and strategies to elicit change talk. And so just looking at that, kind of being able to identify what they are and where they're at in that. So desire statements are statements indicating a desire to make a change. And these are questions that you could ask to kind of evoke that, right? How would you like for blank to change? How do you hope or work? What do you hope to work together and accomplish? Those type of things. Ability statements. This is the client's self-efficacy or a belief in their ability to make changes. So there's some examples there too. If you decide to quit blank, what steps would you take? What do you think you might be able to change about your blank? And I know because this is SAMHSA, this is kind of focused heavily on alcohol and drugs, but I feel like you could really kind of pop in different things there. Reason statements. These are statements that reflect the reasons the client gives for considering a change. I have to quit smoking because of my asthma. So you can ask questions like, what are some of the reasons you have for blank? Why would you want to stop or cut back on blank? And what's the downside of you continuing to use blank? Okay. And need statements. These are statements that indicate a need for change. Statements, the emphasis is more emotional rather than a more cognitive reason. So some questions you could use to evoke these are, what needs to happen for you to feel ready to give up blank? How important is it for you to stop blank? Okay. And mobilizing change talk, which is the CAT commitment. Statements that are linchpins in the change talk are critical predictors of change occurring. So this is, I am going to, I intend to, I will, I want to. So when you start hearing those, that is change talk and part of commitment, right? Activation. This is statements about a willingness to move forward and to move toward action, yet hasn't been done yet. I am ready to, I am prepared to, those type of things. And then taking steps, these are statements about the person has actually begun changing. I went to a support group meeting. This week I didn't do this, or I didn't, I made sure to eat before going to the grocery store, or whatever it is, actual taking steps. Okay. So that's really going to help you in recognizing where the person is and evoking change talk, and discriminating the sustain and change talk. Those are hard to say together like that. Just a couple of suggestions, and I believe this is in some of the resources. Evoking change talk. Your goal is to strengthen change talk and or commitment to language. Explore a typical day, asking evocative questions, using the importance ruler. That's kind of like a measurement, like a Likert scale on, a scale of 0 to 10, how that kind of thing. Querying examples, looking back. So kind of looking back and how were things then and how different is it now? And then looking forward in 5 years, how would you like things, and exploring goals and values. I know that this is a lot of information, and this is also why I really wanted to keep things like as a general overview today, because there is so much information and it is really difficult to kind of like go in depth in any one of these areas, because I wanted to keep the general structure and overview for everybody here. So the 5 principles of motivational interviewing is express empathy. We want to develop discrepancy between present behavior and broader goals. Avoid argumentation. Again, that's that confrontational, kind of thing that we talked about. And roll with ambivalence or sustain talk. And so when you hear somebody kind of stuck in that sustain talk place, and they have reluctance or ambivalence, and they're not opposed but acknowledged by the therapist to be natural and understandable. Okay, so when you hear that as a therapist, understand that this is part of the process, and we're not going to impose like new views or goals. Rather, the client is invited to consider new information as offered new perspectives. Okay, so just, I understand that as a clinician, when you kind of hear all that negativity, or if you hear that reluctance, that can be really difficult, but the point is roll with it and keep going with the process. And we want to support self-efficacy. A person's belief in their ability to carry out and succeed with a task. And a goal of MI is to increase their perceptions of their capability to cope with an obstacle and to succeed in change. The client not only can, but must make this change for themselves. We cannot force people to change. That is not going to happen. You guys know that. I mean, so we need to carry that into our practice. If we try, it's going to make it worse. We know that. So I have an example and a non-example. It's just a quick vignette I wanted to show you of what like a quick interview would look like utilizing these skills. So this, and I was trying, I know it's a little, I don't know, kind of cheesy looking, but I wanted to use the same person in the same situation. So I was trying to find an example and non-example of the same thing. So here's an ineffective example.
Doctors, nurses, and physician assistants all have opportunities to counsel patients.
For Aiden, that should help with the ear infection, but in looking through the chart, I mean, it seems like he's had 6 or 7 of these just in the past year or so.
Yeah.
That's really a big problem.
Yeah, it's pretty stressful for both of us. He gets really upset.
Well, one of the primary risk factors for multiple ear infections in kids is actually smoke exposure. Are you smoking?
Yeah, I do smoke, but I don't smoke around him. I try really hard not to smoke around him.
Well, the fact that he's having these ear infections is indicating to me that he is being exposed to smoke. And so, what can you tell me about that?
I don't know. I mean, I try really hard not to smoke around him. I don't smoke in the car. When he's home, I go outside to smoke. I mean, I know it's bad, and I know it's bad for him, so I don't want him to be around it, so I try really hard.
I really need you to quit smoking, both for your health and for Aiden. Did you know smoking around your child is associated not only with ear infections, it could get to the point where you have to put tubes in his ears pretty shortly here, but also things like vitamin C deficiency, cavities, like dental cavities, behavior problems, asthma, other upper respiratory infections. It's really putting him at a lot of risk. In addition to that, kids of smokers end up smoking themselves. Do you want him to grow up to be a smoker?
No, but I don't smoke. I've thought about quitting, but it's really hard. So I just don't know how to do it.
Well, now's the time to quit. It's really gotten to the point where you can't keep smoking. Not only for him, like I said, but also for you. You're putting yourself at risk for lung cancer, for emphysema, for oral cancers, for heart disease, for all kinds of things.
I know. I've heard, people have told me before, I've heard all that. I just don't know how to do it. How am I supposed to quit? It's so hard.
Well, there's all kinds of things you can use now. It's not as hard as it used to be. You can use nicotine replacement. There's patches, there's lozenges, there's gum, there's the inhaler, there's nasal spray. We can talk about medications. You can try Chantix, you can try Zyban. There's quit smoking groups you can go to. There's hotlines you can call.
I just don't have time
There's
for
no
any of
reason
that.
why you shouldn't be able to quit. This is really important.
I understand that. I know it is. I mean, everybody has problems, right? It's really, really hard.
Well, what can be more important to you than the health of your child?
I don't know.
I really need you to tell me that you're going to quit smoking. This is really important.
I'll go look at all those things and I'll find, I guess I'll try to find something and I'll talk to my doctor about it.
Okay, well, I think you really need to think about this seriously. Like I said, it's really putting yourself and your child in danger.
Okay. Whatever. Okay.
Okay.
By starting the
Okay, so if you guys noticed, there's a lot of the kind of like pitfalls and traps in there that we talked up and brought about. So you have the expert, the doctor, right? And so in that position, you know, she's the expert in the situation. She's also kind of giving a lot of information. You know, it causes this, it causes this, it causes this. She probably already knows most of that. And it's a very confrontational approach style and saying, you need to change. This is what you need to do. So again, that's a very good non-example. Let's see here. Okay, here we go. We have an effective example. So like I said, I wanted to take the same person, the same situation to just show the opposite.
Watch what happens this.
Okay.
I did want to talk to you, though. I'm a little bit concerned looking through his chart at how many ear infections he's had recently, and I noticed that you had checked the box that someone's smoking in the home, so I was wondering if you can tell me a little more about that.
Well, it's just me and him, and I do smoke. I try really hard not to smoke around him, but I I've been smoking for 10 years, except when I was pregnant with him. But it's so stressful being a single mom and having a full-time job. And so that's why I started smoking again.
You have a lot of things going on, and smoking's kind of a way to relax and de-stress.
Yes, yeah. Some people have a glass of wine, I have a cigarette.
Sure. And it sounds like you're trying not to smoke around him. Why did you make that decision?
I know it's not good for him. I mean, I've read those things about ear infections and asthma and stuff, but other kids have ear infections and their parents don't smoke.
So on the one hand, you're worried about how your smoking might be affecting him, and on the other hand, you're not so sure if it's really the smoking that's causing these problems.
Right. Yeah.
So if you notice there, she had asked, the why. So why did you make that decision? So if, evoking that information from her, and then there she just used the summarizing. So on one hand, and then on the other hand, so just pointing out some of the skills there.
Yeah. I mean, he doesn't have asthma. He hasn't had a lot of other problems that his other friends have. So, and I've thought about quitting before in the past, but I just don't see how it's possible right now.
What made you decide to quit smoking when you were pregnant?
Well, he was inside me and we were sharing everything, and I knew that he would get some of that, and I just didn't think I could live with myself if something happened to him.
Right now, though, it feels almost too difficult to even manage or even to try.
Yeah, exactly.
So again, another open-ended question started with a what. A lot of your open-ended questions are going to start with those W like what, who, why, and then again, reflective, listening there, reflective, and then summarizing.
How were you successful when you quit before?
I don't know. I think about it now. I don't even know how I did it. I just did it. I just couldn't imagine like him not being born or going into labor early and him having problems and stuff like that, all the stuff that they talk about with women who smoke. So that was just enough to say, okay, you know what, I'm not going to risk that. So
the risks were so scary then that you're able to stop, but
Yeah.
they don't feel as scary to you now.
no, I mean, we're two separate people, and like I said, I try really hard not to smoke around him. I'm pretty good about that. I don't let other people smoke around him. So
You're doing the best you can do.
yes. Yeah.
Okay, but it sounds to me too like part of you really does want to quit.
Yeah, I know that I need to, and I keep every new year I say, okay, this year I'm going to quit smoking, but then something happens and it just doesn't.
It's
and
on your
quitting
to-do
doesn't
list,
happen.
it's just not making it to the top.
Yeah.
If you did decide to quit, on a scale of 1 to 10, where 1 is not at all confident, you don't think you could do it, and 10 is you feel pretty certain that you could, where do you think you fall right now?
Probably like a 5, kind of in that.
And that's an example of darn cat. Whenever I brought up using the scaling questions, scale to 1 to 10. So again, using darn cat and the skills in there.
Unsure area. Like I know I've done it before, so I know I can do it, but at the same time it just seems really hard, and it's not the same situation.
Well, what made you say 5 rather than 2 or 3?
I know all the ways it's bad for me, and I don't want him to grow up thinking that it's okay to smoke. I don't want him to use any kind of, I don't want him to chew or anything like that. So I know I need to, especially before he gets old enough to understand what mommy's doing, but I just don't know if I can do it.
Okay. So it sounds like you have a lot of reasons why you'd like to quit. You have been successful quitting in the past, and right now you're just feeling a little bit hesitant about your ability to do it.
Yeah.
Where do you think we should go from here?
I don't know.
So again, there we had some, summary, and if you can tell, the doctor's hearing a lot of like sustained talk too. So she's saying, it's really hard. It's just hard to do that, and I'm really stressed out right now. And then the doctor then putting, the direction and planning on her instead of saying, this is what you can do, and there's Chantix and there's pills and there's lozenges. Which one are you going to pick? She's saying, well, you've done it before, but you're saying, you're not sure if you're ready, and it's really hard. Where would you like to go? So again, that person-centered, client-centered approach of them directing.
I'd like some help. I just don't know what kind of help I need.
Sure. Well, if you'd be interested, that's something I can definitely talk to you about. There are a lot of new options that can actually help people be way more successful in their attempt at quitting. There's different medications you can try.
I don't like medicine.
Okay. There's also a lot of support groups and classes that you can take where you have other people to go through it with you. And sometimes just having that support can be a big part of it, especially for people like you where smoking is such a stress reliever.
That sounds nice, but I'm not sure if I have the time for all that.
Sure, it feels like something that would take up a lot of time and maybe not fit into your life. I wonder if we could talk about some options that might fit into your life.
That would be really nice.
Okay, well, if you're willing, then we could set up another appointment where you could come in and we could talk more about that.
I would like that. That would be great.
Great.
Thank you.
Sure.
Okay, so very, very stark difference there in looking at the approach style. And so I just kind of wanted to kind of pause some throughout and point out some of the things that we had talked about and giving examples of those specific things and where they were being used in the video. So the other, I wanted to kind of also point out, because I really liked this, and I'm going to, it's again, this handbook that I've included in the resources. It's a pocket guide to motivational interviewing. This is probably my favorite thing in there. It's reviewing a session and how did I do. So after a session, having that kind of like reflective part and saying, how did I do? So questions like, did it feel like I was wrestling or dancing? I think that's a really good question to ask, because if you leave, a session or meeting with somebody, that you're working with, and it literally felt like you were like wrestling back and forth with them, that is not a good sign. That means there's a lot of those traps happening. It was confrontational. And we need to take a step back and look at what we did and change some of those things. And it should be, if you saw that was much more natural, that conversation between them, and it didn't feel aggressive. Did I seek to understand this person and their world? What was my ratio of questions versus reflections like? Did I reassure this person that ambivalence to change is normal? And if you heard the doctor, she said several times, like, that's understandable. And, I can understand that. And, that's common so that they're not feeling like it isn't. I was trying to find that ratio of, questions, because they actually have a suggestion for that, but we're kind of close on time here, so I don't want to spend too much time trying to find that. Anyways, did I encourage this person to talk about his or her reasons for not changing? What did I do with change talk? Did I ask permission to give information or feedback? So the doctor had said, well, where would you like to go? What would you like to do? And then she said, is it okay if I give some suggestions? And she said, yeah, I would like that. So she's asking for permission and not just saying all of this. What did I do with sustained talk or discord? Whose change is it? Did I keep the writing reflex at bay? Remember that desire to force upon change? What did I do well in this session that was consistent with motivational interviewing, and anything I would like to do differently? So I think that's just a really good thing for a clinician, and for, someone to kind of having to grow and review over at the end, just to kind of make sure that we're on the right track. We are kind of ending on time here. I had tried to leave some time for questions. I don't think I did a very good job of that. But I just want to encourage all of you, I know that it can be a little overwhelming if you're not familiar with it. There's a lot of resources out there and examples, and just like anything, there's training, there's classes out there that you can take, and practicing these skills is going to be one of the best way to build them. Be compassionate and empathetic for yourself as well as others. Danielle, I guess we have a few minutes left, I think, if we wanted to do a question or two, if there's any.
I am not currently seeing any questions.
Okay.
There's been great discussion throughout. I think that providing the examples was a huge help in being able to see that, in action. I will scroll through real quick again, but I am not seeing anything. Just a lot of thanks for sharing all of the great information. And you do have your resources here, so people will have access to those resources when the presentation is sent out following this webinar. Yeah, I don't see anything, but thank you so much,
Okay.
Allison, for
Thank you,
sharing all of
everybody.
your knowledge. And just as a reminder to everyone, be on the lookout. You'll get that post-exam via email. It'll come directly to the email address that you had registered with, that you got the Zoom link through, and that will come within like 24 hours. So be on the lookout for that, and that's what needs to be completed to get to your certificate. Thank you so much, Allison. Thank you, everyone, for joining us, and I hope that everyone has a great rest of the day.